I promise you, G major, if you give me one more chance, I can prove to you that we can do this together. Get the spaceship! Get the spaceship! Hey, Chris from Good Enough Guitar, where we tackle the psychology of practice in your journey to become a better player. I may not be an expert guitarist, but I do have a PhD in motivation, so let's see if we can't figure this out together. And be sure to subscribe, like, and comment if you find these videos helpful. So let's jump into it. Do you find playing scales tedious and boring? Has anyone out there really given you a good explanation as to why you should be playing them? Does playing scales quash your motivation to do anything else? There are just so many of them out there. There's major scale, minor scale, pentatonic, blues, harmonic, Locrian, Dorian, Lydian, diminished. They just keep coming in all directions. What am I supposed to play? Perhaps you search and try to find someone to give you an explanation about why playing scales on guitar is important. And maybe things go a little bit like this. I can't be the only one that hates playing scales. Certainly there must be somebody out there that has a more positive outlook on what it means to play them. Let's have a look and see. Playing scales has always filled me with dread. I'm answering to you as I just finished my daily guitar practice with stupid scales practice, and I still hate it. As a guitar player, let me just say I hate scales because it's really boring. Just like I know living on grilled chicken and broccoli and doing 200 sit-ups a day will be good for me, I would rather jump off a cliff than practice scales. Seems a little dramatic. Seriously, pentatonic scales. They are a cancer that plagues guitar players. Look, Neil Young has something to say about playing scales. Certainly, a legendary guitar player must have a favorable look about them. Let's see what he says. First off, nobody cares if you know how to play scales. Nobody gives a if you have good technique or not. The technical aspect is absolute hogwash as far as I'm concerned. I think about it on another level. I don't care about that sort of Hey, my, indeed, Neil Young. How hard could it be to come up with a more enjoyable and fun way to play scales on guitar? The scales are really based on notes, and notes are really just based on the alphabet. The alphabet can be pretty fun. The alphabet. Okay, G major, I think I have figured out a way to make this up to you. Sharp. Now that is a lot more fun. When it comes to motivation, it only makes sense that if we see an activity as pointless or useless, why would we bother doing it? Being told that something is good for you is not a great motivational tool. Too many times, it's the content of scales that will lead to poor motivation. The content being the type of scale you're playing, the notes that are contained within that scale, and the pattern that applies to that scale. So here's an example of that. If I said to you, it would be really good for your guitar playing to learn the C major and the G major scales both in open position. And here's what they look like. The C major scale has a beginning note of C and an ending note of C, where you play C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and back to the root note C. So we start and finish with the root C. And if we play the G major scale in open position, we start with the root G and we play A, B, C, D, E, and the G major scale has a sharp, F sharp, and then finishing on the root note G. So like the C major scale, the G major scale, we start and we end on the root note G. And if you were to go and practice these scales, you might start scratching your head and saying to yourself, what is the point of doing this? How is learning the C major scale and the G major scale in open position going to help me play songs? Why would I waste my time learning this when I have so many other things that I want to learn and practice that are so much more interesting than playing scales, which are very repetitive and boring? So what if instead we looked at some underlying tools that can be used within these scales or scale patterns that actually will help us in a practical way play guitar and transfer skills to other aspects of our playing, including playing songs? Let's first look at a scale pattern that we can use in order to apply those tools. So here we're going to use two simple patterns. The first is the C pattern based on the C major scale, which has no sharps and flats in the open position. And the second is going to be based on the G major scale in the open position, which normally will have an F sharp. But we're going to take that pattern and we're not necessarily going to be playing the notes that correspond to a G scale, but we're going to use that G pattern. So the C pattern going up will look and sound like this. And the G pattern going down will look and sound like this. And now that we have these scale patterns, we're going to worry less about the content of those scales, being the C major and the G major scales, and we're going to look instead about what tools these scale patterns can provide us so that it applies to our guitar playing. So let's take a look at our left hand as if it were a typewriter. One major component is the carriage, and the carriage carries the paper across from side to side. And it's then one of the second major components, the strikers, which hit the paper when the keys are pressed to put the letters onto the paper. So if the carriage of our typewriter is working correctly, and if the strikers are functioning as they should, the letters and words on our page will look something like this. However, if either the carriage or the strikers are malfunctioning, it's then likely that our letters and words will end up on the page in an inconsistent and haphazard manner. So let's take a look how to get our hands and fingers to function as a typewriter when we use these scale patterns. When we move up the C pattern scale, our hand moves from left to right, and our first three fingers strike the notes as we move along and down the 6 strings. You'll also notice that your hand will rotate ever so slightly inwards as you move down from one string to the next. And next, let's take a look at the G pattern and how we move down using our bass as the 5th position where we use our first finger. In the G pattern, we're now using 4 fingers rather than 3. Importantly, we're now employing the pinky finger. And now we're moving our carriage of our hand in the opposite direction, from right to left, and the rotation of our hand will also move in the opposite direction as our hand moves up from the first string to the sixth. Now what we can do to improve our typewriter function even better is we can now do those patterns from C to G in the opposite direction. We can now move up the fretboard in G and down back in the C pattern. So here we are first moving from left to right and downwards in the G pattern. And when we get to the C pattern, we now move from right to left and upwards from the first string to the sixth string. So now that we've looked at how our hands and our fingers can move as a carriage and the strikers in a typewriter, you've probably noticed the second tool as you play this pattern, and that is the shift that we make from the open position to the fifth position from the C to the G pattern, and again a shift from the fifth position down to the open position when we shift from the G to the C pattern. The shifting of our finger relies on the second tool, which we're going to discuss here, which is the use of a guide finger. A guide finger is useful so that we're not randomly bringing our hands up and trying to put it back down where it needs to belong when we're shifting from note to note or chord to chord up and down the fretboard. So when we finish the C pattern, we can then use this first index finger as a guide to shift up to the fifth fret to finish off the C pattern. In doing so, we don't need to lift all of our fingers from the fretboard and hope that we land in the right spot. And then the same is true when we shift from the G pattern to finish off. We can shift our guide finger all the way down. And in doing so, not having to lift our whole hand, move our whole hand down, and hope that our hand and fingers land in the place where they need to be. Practicing guide fingers within the context of scales should help you immensely then when you are trying to shift from one note or one chord to the next when playing songs. Okay, so we have the carriage of our typewriter working properly, and the strikers are functioning as they should, and we've even started using guide fingers to advance our carriage up and down the fretboard. Now these tools really target the accuracy of our playing, but we may find that our typewriter remains inconsistent. So here, our typewriter is functioning in an accurate manner, but the speed tends to be quite variable. So if our goal here is to build an efficient machine, we need both accuracy and speed in order to do so. So what tools can we use to increase the speed and the consistency in which we play? And how is it that these scale patterns can not only improve our consistency, but also our speed? In order to do this, we employ another tool, a metronome. Like playing scales, a metronome is something that a lot of people find very difficult to use. Some may go as far as to say a metronome is equally as painful and as boring as simply playing scales. However, if we can build metronome practice into the workings of our machine, it makes it far more likely that you'll begin to see the benefits of using a metronome in just about any aspect of your guitar playing. And whether that be things like improving your chord changes or speeding up your guitar solos. So when starting these scale patterns, don't worry too much if your metronome speed is quite slow in the beginning. Being able to play it slowly and accurately is going to make it more likely that you're able to speed up and improve your playing. So you might start with something slow in and around 60 beats a minute on your metronome and play something like this. final tool that these scale patterns can offer us are ways in which to learn and incorporate strategies that can improve our motivation throughout our guitar practice. Starting any activity is often where our motivation falls apart, and you've probably found that once you get on a roll with an activity, it's much easier to keep that activity going. Thus, if you start out right, you're more likely to keep going. And if you carry these tools forward into the rest of your guitar practice, you're more likely to feel and think in a much more positive way and keep your motivation going. However, all of us can fall into the traps of frustration and negative thinking that can cause us to quit playing. And because guitar requires seemingly endless, awkward but precise movements with both our fingers and our hands, there are times where playing guitar can seem much more like a punishment than it is a reward. If we bring awareness to these negative thoughts and emotional states into our guitar practice from the beginning, it becomes much more likely that we're able to manage or deal with them when they arise, so that we can learn to think in a much more flexible, gentle, and patient manner that will bolster our ability to keep going. Scales can indeed serve many useful purposes. However, for those that struggle to play them or have a hard time seeing the benefit of playing scales, I hope that these strategies will provide you with some insight into how they may serve more of a practical purpose and help you improve your playing overall. In doing so, we might be more likely to prevent any extended absences. Or ensure that the way we approach scales is as an age-appropriate activity. The alphabet can be pretty fun. Thanks for watching, and be sure to stay tuned to Good Enough Guitar for more tips and tricks that not only get you started, but help keep you going. Until next time.